Hello, welcome to this Friday's LinkedIn Live. This is also on Twitter and Facebook. I am Rachel B. Lee. Happy July 1. I really couldn't have picked a better guest for this week, for this time in our history, than Dr. Tina Opie. Thank you so much for being here, first of all.
Well, thank you for having me, Rachel.
She is just what I consider to be a total badass and lady boss. I mean, the ultimate. And shout out to Aaron Walton for connecting us and me being introduced to this beautiful soul. If you are watching wherever you are, please get those comments and questions in. Let us know where you're tuning in from. That is always super fun for me and our guest. And really, the conversation today is around shared sisterhood in the workplace. Before we get into that, Dr. Tina, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to in this book coming out.
Yes, thank you so much, Rachel. First of all, my birthday was yesterday. I'm celebrating today, and you're part of that celebration because the work that you're doing, I mean, it really is a gift to all of us. So thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. So a little bit about myself. You have to tell me if I go back too far. But I often start off when I'm meeting with new audiences, and I'm so excited to connect with yours. I'm a military brat. And for those who are not from the United States, what I mean by that is my mother was in the Marines and my father was in the Navy. And so we traveled a lot. I was always an outsider, having to figure out how to make my way in. And that caused me, I think, to have a really high sense of empathy, but also a desire to understand people. I had to learn how to observe people. And now, fast forward to 2022, that's what Shared Sisterhood is about. That's what my consulting and public speaking is about. I help people really state sort of unstated norms that are out there that may be affecting people differently. I help people to connect. And I use the term authentic. I'm almost hesitant to use that because it's sort of a crazy buzzword, but I literally mean connections characterized by trust, empathy, risk taking, and vulnerability, where we can talk about the things together that we would normally go to sort of our private corners and sort of whisper with people who we think we do trust. I want to bring those conversations in a facilitated way into the public square so that we can finally address issues that have plagued our society for centuries, like racism and sexism.
It's phenomenal work that you're doing. Professor at Babson just had her first TEDx talk, Reno, come out, which was a phenomenal interview. Do you want to say what up to Bez here? He says, happy birthday. He's also one of our standout authority coin holders and community members, our family. So what's up, Bez? Thanks for hanging with us.
Thank you for the birthday wishes. It's sort of, remember when we were really young, the birthdays couldn't come quick enough. I'm like, this is my 51st birthday. Last year when I turned 50, I was like, am I 50 already? Because you sort of feel 32 on the inside, and then you're like, okay, I'm 51 now. I'm more than halfway through my life, Rachel. That may sound morbid to some people, but that's just motivating to me. I want to leave a legacy. I want my name to mean something when I die. I know that sounds crazy, but
No.
that actually leads me to be more purposeful every day. And I'm hearing some feedback. It's probably from me. Do you know how I should adjust that? I know, and this is live, folks.
It is live. How bad is it? An echo?
I hear like a squawking. It sounds like it's coming from a speaker or something. And if you don't hear it, I'm good.
I don't hear it.
Okay, good. If
So
you don't hear it, I'm good.
okay. But Josh, my husband, he'll text me, he'll let me know if you know Josh, he'll let me know if the sound is totally off. But I see Josh is here saying, "Hey, what's up? Happy birthday." Patty Tom's also a military brat and her husband. And then my mom, Marilyn Bronstein.
Hi, Mom.
And
Hi,
happy
Mom.
birthday.
I
I
love this.
I love it. And Patty says we sound good. So I think
Okay, good.
we're okay. So let's get into this. I had the pleasure of watching your TED talk, and then also listening into that great workshop you did on Harvard at Harvard, the Harvard Business Review, and I just
Yeah.
love the realness in which you're approaching this very challenging conversation around inequities and diversity and inclusion in the workspace. So, first, can you define shared sisterhood in the workplace? And then I really want you to talk about these three concepts around digging, bridging, and then that collective action.
Sure. So, shared sisterhood is a philosophy about how we can all link arms and move together to pursue equity. And Rachel, you tell me, I'm a professor, so definitions are critical. Equity and equality are different things, and people may use the terms interchangeably, but as I did in my TED talk, I'll now do here. Equality just means that you give everyone the same thing. Equity means that you have systems that are sensitive to the unique needs of the people in that system. And so you create policies that redress those historical inequities and ensure that people can move forward with justice. So that's how I define the distinctions between equity and equality. Shared sisterhood is the pursuit, the collective pursuit of equity in the workplace. It can be applied outside of the workplace, but I'm a business professor. So we and my co-author, Dr. Beth Livingston, she is a white woman, and also if you listen to the TED Talk, you hear me talk about how we came together. But I identify as a Christian Black woman. She identifies as an atheist white woman, and the two of us came together to develop shared sisterhood. I came up with the idea, worked with Beth to develop it so that we could have an actual practical toolkit to help people challenge these issues. And the way that the practices that we look at are dig, bridge, and collective action. So dig is about you as an individual, understanding what your own assumptions are about, say, race or gender, surfacing those assumptions and soberly analyzing them. I think a lot of us can lie to ourselves because we like to think that we are fair and just and kind, et cetera, et cetera. And that may be true, but two things can be true at once. You can be fair and just and kind and have racist thoughts that you hold. And if you want, I can share a story of where I had to confront my own racism.
Please do.
And so I also want to define the term racism. The way that we talk about racism in our book, and many scholars do as well, is prejudice plus power. So sometimes, for those of you who I'm a strong cup of coffee, I've said, so I'm very direct, and hopefully people will like that flavor. Some might not. But when I talk with white people, they're like, well, Black people can be racist too. And I'm like, well, let's look at the definition of racism, which is prejudice plus power. Black people can be prejudiced. So if you're a white person and you lived in a neighborhood and you got beaten up by Black kids because you were white, that is racial prejudice. What it is not is racism. And the reason why it's important is because racism looks at institutional systems. So when white people when they beat up Black people or lynched them, in addition to having that interpersonal behavior, they could also create systems to prevent that, to sort of embed that prejudice in the larger world. So for example, you might be uncomfortable living around Black people. You create a sundown law. Are you familiar with that, Rachel?
No.
Yeah, so you can Google this and you can find out if your town that you live in was or still may be a sundown town. And what that means is when the sun sets, Black people were not allowed to be in these towns. So you can imagine, given the way that we have residential segregation now, if you were visiting a friend or playing on a sports team, when the sun looked like it was about to set, you needed to jet and get to your side if you were Black, not if you were white, if you were Black, you need to get out of the white neighborhoods. And that might sound like a crazy distant thing, but I want to call our attention to what happens. There was just an incident in Florida, in the same town where Trayvon Martin was murdered a few weeks ago, where a Black teen, he was speeding through a gated community, and he shouldn't have been speeding, that's clear. But these two grown white men threw a stone through his car. They stopped him. They wanted him to stay. They called the police. He was 16 years old, I believe. That's because he was not viewed as belonging there. That is racism. That is based on a system of preferring particular kinds of prejudice. We prefer that Black people not be here. We have sundown laws. We have redlining, et cetera, et cetera. We don't want Black people working here. So we have particular hiring practices. Those are all racist. And for those in the audience who might be disagreeing with me, a question that you can ask yourself is, tell me a time when Black people have discriminated against white people as a group. What are the laws? And usually people can't come up with anything because in this country, that hasn't really happened. Now tell me a time when white people as a group have discriminated against Black people as a group. You're going to think about real estate, education, the medical system, mass incarceration, police brutality, pay. That is the difference between prejudice and prejudice plus power, which is racism. Rachel, I'll pause there. I can talk a mile a minute.
This is, yeah, I mean, this is super. I love this distinction that you're talking about, prejudice plus power. And to take us, back into what we're talking about here is the digging of us digging in to the racist behaviors, prejudice, and what you're saying. One question I have for you, and then I want you to talk about the next piece, which
Yeah,
is
bridge. Mm-hmm.
digging in alone.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really seem very helpful. Like, how am I supposed to, it's like I'm inside the box.
Yes.
So how do we dig?
Yes.
Truly dig?
Yes. And so, Rachel, that's an excellent question. And what I would say is there is benefit to, as you say, it is difficult to dig totally by yourself. It is helpful sometimes by yourself, though, to journal and write down things like, when did I first even learn about the construct or the idea of race or racism? How old was I? For white people, I ask them this question: when did you become white? And they sort of sit back and they're like, I assume you don't mean when I was born. I'm like, you're correct.
Right.
And so, when did you learn that there were systems attached to that? And journal about your answer to that. Mm-hmm. And then, because what we're trying to do, dig, I literally, when I did this for the first time in my residential neighborhood with just neighbors to see if it would resonate, we need to excavate. We need to go in because we're talking about things on the surface level and talking past each other. But you can start dig that way. But to your point, the next thing is I do think it's a critical thing to find what I call accountability groups or affinity groups. And this is somewhat controversial. So I have a Shared Sisterhood Facebook group, which has about 4,400 people in it. And we dig together and we bridge together. And what I did was I asked people to self-identify by race. They did. And then I created these groups for dig. Because what was happening is, and this is also something important as you all start on the Shared Sisterhood journey, when people were doing dig, specifically what I call power dominant or white women in this instance, they were digging in the presence of Black women, Hispanic women, Latino women, Asian women, Middle Eastern women, and they were actually causing harm. It wasn't intentional, but they were asking questions that were, sort of like, well, Tina, is your hair clean? Or can I touch your hair? So that might seem innocuous, but if you can imagine being asked that question repeatedly,
right,
it becomes taxing and exhausting. And so what I felt, Black women and Latina women came to me and said, we don't feel like this platform is for us. And so I said, we need to create a place where people can self-identify and connect with people who are like them in terms of race, racially similar others. And then we can have bridge groups where we connect with racially dissimilar others. So going back to your very initial question, when you join an accountability group, when you form one, and by the way, I don't run these groups. These are led by women. So you could start one right now. You could get the Shared Sisterhood book, start a book club, and then literally begin the dig process together where you ask yourselves those questions, where you challenge each other, where you say, So I hope that answers your question, Rachel.
Yeah, I think it's phenomenal. And the book is not out yet. I pre-ordered it.
Thank you.
Of course. So really helpful on the digging side. And that in of itself is a whole process.
Right? It is.
And I just, Bez is resonating here. He's Latino, and just some of what you're talking about here is really resonating for here in terms of institutional racism. So the bridge part.
Yes.
Talk about that.
Yes. So bridge, we define that as creating authentic connection with people who are different than you. So literally building a bridge. And you need to do dig first so that you don't cause harm. So that you can understand, as a black woman, there are sometimes I'm not ready to bridge with a white woman because, I just got back from Tulsa, Oklahoma and learned more about the Black Wall Street massacre. I'm very upset right now. It's probably not the best time for me to have deep, deep, deep conversations before I process my own emotions. So that's where dig is necessary to come first. And when you're trying to connect with someone, you need to ask yourself if you are in fact first prepared for that connection. For people from power dominant groups, and I use the term power dominant, I don't use the term majority because the reason why a lot of this conversation matters, the reason why we have talked historically about men and women and now different genders is because there's power that undergirds those terms. Men historically have had power over all other genders. All right. So men would be a power dominant group. White is a power dominant racial ethnicity in the United States. Christian, I'm a Christian woman. I think that that's a power dominant group, at least in the United States. And so when you're bridging, you need to ask yourself, are you from a power dominant group or are you from a historically marginalized group? Mm-hmm. If you're from a power dominant group, when you bridge, it's important that you listen a lot more than you talk. Because believe it or not, we're not entering this conversation at the same place. Earlier in the conversation, I mentioned how I co-wrote the book with Beth Livingston. And in the book, there's a lot of stories, but one of them is we talk about when we first learned about race. And mine was when the white kids jumped out of the pool because when I got in. And I was really young. And my parents had already talked to me, fortunately, about the positive aspects of being a Black person in the world. Beth, while she was aware of race, she didn't really explore it until she was in college. And that is often the case with many power dominant people. So when now come to a situation where you're trying to bridge with someone who has been processing this for decades and you're new to the game, you're not starting at the same place. So power dominant people often have much more to learn from historically marginalized people. And it doesn't mean that you learn it in direct conversation because we're also not trying to burden historically marginalized people with educating everyone. Mm-hmm. And that's where we say, look, get the Shared Sisterhood book. Go to the drtinaopie.com. Go to the library. There are all kinds of reading things. Do it in your dig group so that you have other people you're working with to understand. And then you're ready to bridge. So I hope you can see dig and bridge, it's an iterative process. So you try to connect with someone who's different than you, which may mean a critical component is that they share values of equity. So you and I, Rachel, we're getting to know each other. I love that Aaron connected us. And we may start having conversations where we're bridging. We both value equity. We may start asking questions. Eventually we'll come up with a point of conflict. And then we have to figure out how to address that. And one of the things I would say is we're all going to make mistakes. I think people are so afraid of being canceled that if it's brought to their attention that they said something that was offensive, racist, or sexist, oh my God, you become defensive. And that's understandable. In psychology, we refer to that as it's an avoidant behavior. You're trying to shut down and withdraw. Or you may assertively pursue your own defense. Neither one of those lead to curiosity and exploration. So, or you may be someone who has been wounded or bruised by a power dominant person. And out of those traumatic experiences, you may be unwilling to connect. So it's important that you assess where you are. And remember, the whole purpose of bridge is to connect with this person in an authentic way, but that's not the end goal. The end goal is what you brought up earlier, Rachel, which is collective action. And collective action is where, you've done dig, you've bridged together, you've formed over time this relationship where you trust each other, you can be vulnerable, you take risks, and you can empathize with each other. Now you can link arms and actually begin to look at some of the systems in your workplace.
Mm.
You can begin to say, how are we recruiting people? How are we hiring people and onboarding people, and how are we paying people? That's collective action is about understanding the answers to the questions and then working together to resolve them. So I will pause there.
I mean, the process in which you're going about, I think, is so critical
Mhm.
because either people aren't digging or they're acting without doing the digging and bridging almost.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I see a question from Christine. What if someone is biracial, black and white, or Asian and black? Can you describe how self-identifying is useful in these biracial groups? Well, so Christine, I don't know if you are biracial, if you're, I don't know what the underpinning of the question is, but what I would say is every identity is relevant. And the relevance of each of these identities is contingent upon how much the person identifies with those identities. And so I've had many people who are black and white or black and Asian say, I feel as though I'm forced to choose and I don't like to do that. In and of itself, that's a unique experience that warrants exploration with other people who've experienced that. I think it's critical for us to allow that space. But I want to also be clear the idea is not to stay within racial ethnic category. The idea is to do deeper dig work so that when we bridge, we're better educated and more suitable and able and willing to engage in the bridge process so that we're then prepared to work together for collective action. I hope that answers your question, Christine.
Thank you for addressing that
Sure.
too.
Sure.
Um, I can't help but, obviously bring up what is going on, has been going on over the last several years, in particular across
Mhm.
just everything. We don't even need to name like, but I'm glad you brought up this cancel culture,
Yeah.
and in how do you stand up for, in this collective action as you're digging and bridging. I personally have taken a stance as a woman of what's happening with Roe versus Wade. I have seen backlash to that in a post, right, Dr. Tina?
Yeah.
How how do we take action, stand up while still being sort of civil and it
Yeah.
feels authentic and that it's
Yeah.
not, you're not going to get canceled, but you want to take a stand. I just feel like it's
It's
challenging.
hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is challenging. And what I would say is one, I understand that certain social media outlets are just not conducive to having deeper conversations that would prevent canceling someone. If I really am involved in an interchange with someone that is getting heated, I will often want to call them, meet with them in person. I just really think that we have to say that. But to the larger notion, I think I said at the beginning, or maybe it was right before we went live, we're all going to die at some point. I mean, I know people are working in labs trying to prevent that. But I think, the card just stacked against you. We're going to die. We want our names to mean something. And for me, I want us as a culture, there are some values that we have that some of us may be uncomfortable sharing or talking about. I think it's critical that we develop these authentic. Bridge was created in part because, remember, I'm a Christian. Beth is an atheist. We don't always agree on everything. We have different approaches to things. When the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial came up, Beth and I were talking because the Me Too movement and Tarana Burke really taught me we have to make sure that we start from a place where we believe the victim. And at the same time, as a Black woman, Tulsa is an example. I mentioned that I just came from Tulsa, Oklahoma. That all started because apparently a Black man did something to a white woman. Well, I mean, it started because of jealousy and racism, but the ostensible excuse was that we have to start from a place of believing and then take the information and the data and make decisions from that. We're not always going to agree, though, on how we interpret those data, the information that's there. And so I say all of that because I think it's important that we stand up for the values that we have And I was very clear. I believe the victims, and I'm processing the information that's coming in, and we're going back and forth. I do not think that you can just believe someone writ large, and you definitely should not disbelieve someone writ large. Um, it's a process though. There are some things that I do not say. Now everybody's gonna know what those things are, because I do think that you can be being held accountable is not the same thing as being canceled. But some of the ways that people are being held accountable feels like cancellation. It feels like you make one mistake publicly and you're out. I think you make a mistake and you're held accountable. And then we look at restorative justice, which is about community, which is what are the people who you've harmed? What do they need to be made whole? And are you willing to work and do that? And Michael Vick is an example that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I know some people are like, oh my gosh, Tina, we're going to send you hate mail. The reason I bring that up is because Michael Vick did a horrible thing. He came, the culture where he grew up. I didn't grow up. I don't want people to think I'm saying the Black culture, because we're not a monolith. How about that? But he grew up in a place where dog fighting was appropriate. He got caught. I don't know if he went to jail. I don't know what happened, but apparently he went to jail. But over the past few decades, he's been working with organizations. He has been contributing behind the scenes quietly. And yet, if you bring up his name, he's still reviled. That to me feels like cancel culture in a negative way. Now, the accountability part is necessary. But when do we come to a place where someone can be restored? And maybe there are some infractions where that will never happen. But I think we need to be more readily asking ourselves questions like, what if I was in his shoes? What if I had made that mistake? How would I want to be treated? A second question I ask is, okay, I fervently believe this, but what if I'm wrong? What if the other person is right? What is concerning about my argument and what's appealing about the alternative or divergent opinion? Those are all mechanisms that we use that I've created in Shared Sisterhood to slow the conversation down so that we can better bridge and then have collective action.
It's a quite reflective, and I love this idea of research and data
Yes.
and like getting our story right, where people are very just like commenting and just like, there's just such a reactive culture, Dr. Tina,
Yeah.
isn't leaving room for like what is the real data and information and research behind something. So I really appreciate you bringing light to that. And Christine here, said thank you for her response. 4 nephews are biracial, Black and white. Her sister says they're just as much Black as white. I think so. That's kind of her reflection there. Manny, hey, what's up, Manny? Also from our community, what's up? Just talking about it's extremely binary at times. I think as we sort of close out, I just have another thought that I want you to talk into, which is in the work you do, which is working with big companies.
Mm-hmm.
Like inside the workplace. So it's one thing on social media, me as a business owner and what I'm creating. Inside the workplace becomes even more a little bit shaky, right?
Yeah, it is not for the faint of heart, and it's not for every company. Every company is not necessarily ready. So a couple of things you can ask yourself to see if your shared sisterhood ready is, and then I can get into some of the details of what goes on behind the scenes. But are you willing to do things like collect the data that Rachel said and look at the data you've probably already collected? So by race, by gender, by division, by level. Have you looked at salary? And what happens when you see, almost inevitably, given the gender pay gap and how it's worse for women of color, what are you going to do when you find out that there is a gap? Are you willing to have a pay equity study? If you're not, okay, then that's a sign that you might not be ready for the kind of collective action. And that doesn't mean that you don't participate. Because the way that I have run workshops in organizations is I like to do them from the top down and the bottom up. So whenever sometimes I do public speaking, right? I may have a conversation, one and done. Other times when I'm going in and we're looking at longer term change, I want top down, bottom up, meaning I want to meet with the CEO. the executive committee, and we will do dig and bridge workshops. We'll do shared sisterhood workshops where I'm literally either one on one or maybe two on one or three on one, asking questions that I share with you all during the dig part of the conversation. And then we work on them bridging with each other. And then we think about how can you bridge with your immediate team, and then it cascades throughout the organization. In addition to that, because what I don't want is a leadership team that has experienced shared sisterhood, but it never trickles down to everyone else. I insist, I have focus group conversations. I meet with the LGBTQ group, the Latina group or Hispanic group. I use the term Latina and Hispanic because I've had a lot of people of Hispanic descent tell me they don't like that term. So I just want to be, I'm trying to be sensitive to that. Or Asia, I meet with the women's group. I meet with the men's group.
Yeah.
Because I want to understand what are the unique concerns and challenges that you all have about diversity, equity, and inclusion, about leadership, about culture. And what we do together is we foster trust. I do this off of the organization's websites and servers. They have to deal with me.
Yeah.
Only because I don't want the employees to feel like their big brother is watching. And I know we're wrapping up, but it's really important for organizations to think about that. You don't want something just at the top,
Right.
nor do you want it just with the employees. There needs to be some meeting in the middle because your employees probably have really good insights into what you need to do for collective action. And of course, the leaders are typically empowered with the budget and the authority to enact those changes.
I love that idea. And just from my experience being in corporate culture, it often isn't done in that way.
Yes. Yeah.
It really
Yep.
isn't. It's like left to the ERGs,
Mm-mm.
right? That this is like their side job, their passion. And like that isn't
Yeah.
really fair.
It's not. I actually am very opposed to volunteer. ERGs, people can get together, but when you start using ERGs to come up with your strategy to help you with recruiting, you need to be paying them, and you certainly need to be. It needs to be built into the evaluation system, which it often isn't. And the people at the top, they need to be responsible for culture as well. Why isn't that built into their bonus structure? So we really look at, in addition to everything I've just mentioned, metrics.
Yeah.
I'm big into action plans with names, who's accountable by when, and how much money are they putting in, and how are we going to measure their success. Just last story. People think that this is often intransigent and can't be overcome. When COVID hit, organizations changed their entire structure, focus, format because it was a common enemy. The disease was the virus was a common enemy. Racism, sexism, those should be common enemies. But I think because they're sometimes embedded in our own systems of thinking, we're unwilling to look in the mirror at ourselves. We could fundamentally change organizations if we decided to link arms in the fashion that we've discussed for the last 30 minutes or so.
I mean, it's so fucking true.
I mean, I was alarmed by COVID. I was alarmed by COVID, but something to me said, so the entire world shut down to address this issue, but you're going to tell me it's been centuries and we can't resolve some of these things? Yeah, we need to be real with ourselves.
Yeah, we need to be real with ourselves. Oh my gosh, Dr. Tina, first of all, just thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I have learned so much. I am so happy that some of the community and people are here and they'll continue to watch this. The book, Shared Sisterhood, it's coming out in October, right?
Yes. So you can pre-order now. So if you go to drtinaopie.com, if you go to the Shared Sisterhood link, you can pre-order the book. I know Amazon may be a sponsor. I support our independent bookstores if you can, and there are links for indie bookstores on there as well. But if you pre-order, you may even, who knows, have your organization pre-order and I'll come and do a talk. I mean, I've been known to do that. So
I love that idea. Hey, maybe you'll do a talk for our community once you're just like,
that would be awesome. That would be awesome.
We would love that. Well, happy birthday. Thank you so much. Thanks for everybody that has watched today. Have an amazing July 4th weekend if you're in the United States. And we will see you next time.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you, community.